time.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the public, the planning board members, members of the town staff. Welcome to the September 22nd, 2021 meeting of the Cohasset Planning Board. The time is 6:32 now. I'm going to call roll call and then I'll begin the meeting. Brewer.
Clark Brewer here.
Callahan. Colery.
Paul Colery, hip.
Potter. Brady.
Present.
Glassmeyer here. Lauren, would you please introduce the staff that are here with us tonight and then explain to the public how they can participate in the conversation?
Certainly, thank you. So my name is Lauren Lind. I'm the planning director for the town. And tonight we have on our attendees section, we have Angela Giso from the building department who's taking minutes for us. And then we're also joined by our team of counsel, Sharon Everett. We will, I believe, later be also joined by Carolyn Murray of KP Law. And then for those members of the public wishing to speak to the board tonight, we do ask that you use the question and answer function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You have two ways to do this. For either way, we ask that you indicate your name and address for the record, and then you can either leave written comments in the record or you can ask to address the board, and we'll promote you at the appropriate time to do so. We do ask that you not repeat any items that have already been stated, and that you keep your comments to a 3-minute maximum. Thank you.
Lauren, will you also speak to the agenda timing? Are we still operating on the basis of just continuing and not having a fixed time per item?
Yeah, so the protocol that we have been using lately is that all continued public hearings are continued to the date certain and the time of 6:30. And then we sort of order the items on the agenda. So no public hearings will begin earlier than 6:30 p.m., but we do try to stick to the schedule timing that has been posted on the agenda. And this will be the most recent version that's revised on the town website tonight that we'll be following.
All right, thank you. So I'd like to do a just very brief agenda overview and ask the board members for approval so that the public knows what we're going to be discussing tonight. So this evening, we're going to be discussing 124 Elm Street Easements, 808 Chief Justice Highway will be continued. Situate Hill will be continued. We will continue the discussion. Lauren Lind will then talk with us about the warrant articles. We will address any items that were not on the agenda 48 hours in advance, and then there'll be an update of the board members. So with that, we can begin. The first item on the agenda is 124 Elm Street Easements. Lauren, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, thank you. I'll begin with that item, and then I will turn it over to Sharon Everett to discuss some more detail. So first, I'm going to jog our memory. The topic tonight is reciprocal easements. As many of the board members may recall, we had this topic first sort of appear in the process leading up to annual town meeting of 2020. And this is in relation to the site of 124 Elm Street that came before the board for the special permit and site plan review for the Cohasset Harbor Inn site reconstruction in tangent with 87 Elm Street, the site across the street. At the time, I'm going to share my screen so I can walk through a couple of documents with you for some just procedural history. So when we first saw this sort of come to light, I'm going to share with you, this is the Article 24 that went to annual town meeting in 2020 regarding reciprocal easements. And what this did is once town meeting voted to approve this article, it authorized the Board of Selectmen to negotiate easements at the site of 124 Elm Street relative to this site, and it would have to be in conjunction with the planning board approval of a special permit at this site, along with maintaining the 17 parking spaces that are located at the parking lot adjacent to the Veterans Memorial site. And I'll stop that for a moment, and I will show you the map that corresponded to this so that we can see a little bit more what we're talking about here. So if you see the screen here, this is the concept plan that came along with the article in 2020 leading into annual town meeting, and the concept here.
I think you may have to exit and enter again.
Okay, hold on. There's too many screens open. Okay, there we go. Can you see the map now?
There we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So this is the plan that accompanied the annual town meeting article in 2020. And simply stated, what you see here is this bold black line is the property line. It's an unusually jagged edge. As you're looking at this to the north, that will be the private property. And then all this area down here is actually public space. So often people think of this existing parking as public parking, but it's actually split sort of down the middle by both private and public space. So the annual town meeting vote, in addition to being in conjunction with the planning board decision about the pending special permit process that I'll get into in a moment, that the planning board executed this past year, also conditioned that these 17 spaces would need to be maintained. So I'll stop for a moment there. I saw Paul Cleary raise his hand. Did you have a question now, Paul? Oh, no, sorry, okay. I will move along to my next document in this process. So this is a more updated, can you see the map again?
Nope. Not yet.
You have to unshare and share again.
This is a more updated version of that concept plan that we saw that came along with the site plan set. This was updated in April, which sort of gives you the similar sort of shape and boundary line and what we're looking at here. So we did see this in terms of the site plan. The concept here is that there's going to be 3 different types of easements. First, generally stated, is the parking lot one that I was just referencing. Second there will be a view corridor easement along Margin Street, which was actually baked into the overlay zoning for this site. And then the third will be the public amenity space area that is going to follow at a later date, along with the Chapter 91 management plan that will discuss sort of the state requirements of waterfront permitting and public access along the waterfront. So the public park amenity and that sort of easement will follow at a later date, but just so you're aware, these are the 3 easements that had been discussed in the planning board process. Tonight, specifically, I'm just speaking to you about the parking lot easement, and then I believe when we get to Sharon's piece, she can update us also as to where the easement for the view corridor stands. So then I'll stop sharing my screen again for a moment for my next document. This, once the planning board executed their decision, there were conditions placed upon this site that sort of went into this process, and then the select board now needs to negotiate the easements. The select board had an executive session recently to begin this process, of which the planning board chair and vice chair attended. And during this meeting, it was determined that the select board had recommended that this come back to the planning board for discussion and recommendation to ensure that the easements, as they've now been laid out in their most recent plan presented to the select board, that this goes along with what the planning board had intended all along. So now I'm going to share my screen with that last map that I have for you. I'll just open that now. Let's see. Okay, I'm having trouble sharing it. So I'll pause for a moment while I look to find a non-corrupt version of that file, but I'll show you in a moment. You're going to see it looks quite similar to the concept and then what you had seen in April. It's just been a bit more refined in a July version. I'll find that document for you in a moment. And while you wait for me, I'll turn it over to Sharon to explain from a legal perspective what these easements mean.
Thank you. So we have, as Lauren just mentioned, the planning board requires 3 easements of the developer. One is a cross easement relating to the parking area. And one of the primary objectives of that area is to ensure that the parking spaces, the 17 parking spaces, remain public parking. And your counsel, Paul Hydrants, prepared this cross easement that you may have before you, and that provides for that kind of a restriction limitation, saying that those spaces have to be public. I think the easement is pretty much in final form. There are a few edits to be made, but in my opinion, it's legally sufficient to do what the planning board intended, which is to ensure public access. The town also gives the developer certain access rights to use to go over the access area of the parking lot, which they don't have. And temporary easements for landscaping purposes and construction purposes, which will terminate, after the construction has been completed. I spoke with the developer's attorney today, and he sent me the view easement. haven't had a chance to look at it in depth because I got it at 5 o'clock. But it seems to give you all the rights that you need, which is not only are they covenanting that they will not construct anything, there won't be plants, there won't be buildings, there won't be signs, but also that the town will have the right to go onto the property and to remove any structures at the developer's expense if the same are placed within the view easement in violation of the easement. So I think those two documents fulfill the purposes and the goals of the planning board. The third easement, which is the major easement about the public park and the public amenity, they have been included in the Chapter 91 application that the developer has submitted. And I forwarded those documents to Lauren just this evening. And it seems that during the Chapter 91 process, obviously DEP is going to have hold hearings. There is going to be a lot of opportunity for public comment and public participation. And they have expressly included in their application, as I said, the whole public park to be created. The easement is not ready to be granted at this time. And the reason being is, while the town and the developer can agree on what happens, what the rights and obligations are, it is actually DEP and through the permitting process, through the licensing process, that DEP will actually mandate who does what. And the developer has provided a draft management plan. It is too early for us to enter into this agreement right now because the details are still to be fleshed out. But as I said, that's one of the key elements that DEP will review to make sure that there is public benefit from this development. So the details of that will be fleshed out later, and I understand why it has to be done later. But for now, we have 2 of the 3 easements that you're looking for. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Planning board members, would you like to speak? Tom Callahan?
I just want to know, does the town have participation in the Chapter 91 process, or are we involved in that, or are we trusting DEP to negotiate the public benefit?
When I've seen Chapter 91 licenses work, is that the town is very involved in other circumstances. It's very involved. The planning board is, has its input. The select board has its input, and it's very heavily, carefully reviewed and negotiated. So I would expect that in order to ensure the public access and benefit, the DEP would be looking to the town to make sure that the developer fulfills its obligations.
Other planning board
Thank you.
members?
Thank you.
Sorry, before we move on from that point, could I just add?
Yes, please.
Sorry, I'm the host, so I can't actually raise my hand with the raise hand function. Just to Tom's question, the town staff have been notified of the hearings and the process that they've been moving forward, and we did make sure that they're supplied with all the documentation that the planning board reviewed and the planning board decisions as they've been going through the Chapter 91 process.
Yeah, is anybody from the town actually at the hearings?
Yes, I attended the hearing, one of the hearings at least.
Okay.
All right, Lauren, can you, I will leave the hearing discussion to a later date. So this was an information meeting, our presentation. We requested it during the executive session of the select board to ensure that the spirit of cooperation was demonstrated on behalf of the planning board and in conjunction with the select board. So Lauren, can you essentially create the segue for us to move forward?
Certainly, yes. So you can see the easement sketch dated 7/21/21 on the screen, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the latest edition of this easement sketch. And as you'll see on the top of the screen here, this is the easement area that they're proposing for that view corridor. And then down here is this sort of swap reciprocal easements along the parking lot area. So the board, if the board feels that this it meets the intent of what had been discussed in the planning board process all along leading up to now, the board could recommend to the select board that they move forward with this plan as laid out.
Madam Chair, can I just ask a question?
Yes, Mr. Polari.
So if I remember correctly, I believe there was some sort of a sewer easement also. Is that not under our umbrella, or is that separately handled? I just don't want us to leave anything out before we recommend this to go forward.
May I answer?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. That'll be, that will be included in this, and that's part of the benefit to the town is that actually we are sort of correcting this issue where we have town infrastructure located under private property. So part of this reciprocal easement negotiation will allow the the town to have access to that necessary infrastructure.
Okay, and they don't need us to recommend that or do anything with that, right?
That's going to be encapsulated in this process.
Okay, just wanted to put it out there as a reminder.
Thank you. Are there any other comments of planning board members?
Yes. Clark,
Brewer?
on the view corridor easement, I don't have the language from the bylaw in front of me. But my recollection from drafting that was that the view corridor easement aligned with the southern edge of Elm Street and extended all the way to the edge of the site north, instead of what's shown here looks like a 40 or 50 foot slice, if you will. I think that it had a southern boundary and then and no northern boundary in terms of the easement. The easement would extend all the way to the public way or public property.
Clark, can I ask you, would that have been on one of the earlier maps?
I don't know.
Lauren, could you put the first map up in which we can see the easements?
Yes, let me take a look.
Thank you.
Please.
And our bylaw, if you could just help me, was that section 23?
I believe it was 22.
22, okay.
So okay, I'm going to share the April plan again. I don't believe this is the information that Clark is looking for.
I just did find the bylaw language.
So this was the previous map that I had just showed you earlier. This shows the easement, I believe, along the bottom edge. Hold on. Yeah, this isn't showing the detail that Clark is looking for in this instance. But what I'll share back the plan that we have again, just so I can get a better understanding of what Clark is looking for. Let me make sure I have the right sketch. Okay. So the question here, this is Margin Street here. Where would you be looking for the easement to extend?
Well, my recollection is that the southern edge of the view corridor easement was to align with Elm Street, and I don't have the language pulled out of the bylaw, but I don't believe there was a northern edge. I think it was, at least the intent was that it be open to the north, so that the view of the harbor from that area as you get closer expands as opposed to being constrained. But I'd have to check it against the specific language that was in that got passed in the bylaw that got passed at town meeting. And I just don't have that section pulled up.
May I direct a question as I can look for that information in the bylaw in a moment, but regarding opposed to the view corridor easement. Are there concerns with the parking lot section of the easement?
No.
No,
I just,
don't-
I just found the language in the bylaw. I think
what
This
section
pla-
is it?
Just a minute, one person speaking at a time, thank you.
it's under 22.6 subsection 4, the last sentence of subsection 4. I
Thanks.
think the only, this plan for the view easement is meeting the intent of the bylaw, which is the view to the ocean. But it also does say the southern edge of Elm Street, or in this case, Margin Street. I think the only concern here is that where the building is, that there wouldn't be any obstruction, some new protuberance out of the building towards Margin Street that would obstruct the southern edge, the view along the southern edge of the street. I mean, I think as a practical matter, that'll never happen because the property owner doesn't own that sidewalk or that street. But I think that's the only real issue here. I mean, the intent of the bylaw was to preserve the view to the water, and that's being done here. I don't know that there's anything else that needs to be said about it, but I mean, theoretically, it's not, this crosshatch area should probably extend to the left along Margin Street so that it's encompassing the southern border of the street. But, as a practical matter, this building is not going to be able to be expanded into the street where it would obstruct the view. The concern about the easement was down toward the water's edge where it is their property, and we didn't want them putting a building on their property within that view corridor. So
Right, well-
I think this is fine as it is, but I understand what Clark's point is about the language of the bylaw.
Clark, would you like to make a recommendation?
Well, I guess I can't tell if the southern edge of this view corridor easement aligns with the southern edge of Elm Street. And I would have expected that the view corridor would extend into the triangle to the north in this diagram that's off the page a little bit. That would encompass that entire triangular area and not just be the slot. So again, I can't confirm the geometry. I'd like to have it confirmed in relation to the southern edge of Elm Street. And I'd like to have the hatching expanded so that it encompasses the entire triangle to the Margin Street town public way.
All right, Clark, are you?
And I
making
think
a
the reason for
recommendation?
that is there was some talk about some kiosks and things. And once you start to get towards the end of Margin Street, having that view open up as opposed to being a constrained slot, I think is important.
So Clark, would you like to make a recommendation, please?
Well, I'd like, yes, I'll make a recommendation that the applicant's team revise the view corridor easement as discussed so that we can confirm the southern edge and that the view corridor extends to the public way on Margin Street in the triangle to the north of what is shown.
All right, thank you. Lauren, that doesn't require a second and a vote, correct?
I would suggest that you can take this as one fell swoop of a vote if you're comfortable with that at the end. What I might suggest is, if, to Clark's point there, that you can table this for a future, you can vote on this at a later date and we can have that detail sorted out. But if you're interested in accepting of the portion that's to the south of the site abutting the town premises and the Memorial Park, you could vote on that now if that would be something that you'd like to do.
Well, since this is an informational meeting, do we really have to vote on it at all?
I think the select board had been interested in a recommendation from the board. That's why I had to return to the planning board. So I think that they would feel comfortable. So it's really just sort of a recommendation rather than a formal vote of action.
All right, move that we recommend the approval of the easement that's been drafted and the accompanying plan for the town, for the parking lot area at the south side of the site.
May I get a second? May I
Do
get a
we need,
second?
do I need to modify my motion or was that informational?
I think
No,
what
what-
Lauren said is we could table yours and get the document that you would like to see and then
Okay.
bring that back.
All right, then I'll second Tom's motion.
All right, roll call vote. Clark Brewer,
Clark Brewer, aye.
Tom Callahan,
Aye.
Paul Grady,
Aye.
Eric Potter,
Aye.
Amy Glassmeyer.
Does he-
Thank you. Lauren, can you then guide us to bringing this back at a later date after the documentation has been adjusted regarding Clark Brewer's interests?
Certainly, I will correspond between our legal counsel, our select board, and the applicant to determine when we can bring this back to the planning board for another recommendation for that portion. And we'll circulate the recommendation about the parking lot area to the select board so that they can move forward with that process in the meantime. With that, I'm going to thank Sharon Everett for joining us so much, and I'm going to dismiss her because she's not going to be joining us for the rest of our agenda tonight. So,
All right, tink you very much, and we'll see you again.
Thank you. But
Thank
good
you.
night.
All right, Lauren, will you guide us into 808 Chief Justice Highway?
yes, I will. Before I do that, I realize Carolyn Murray has joined us. Carolyn Murray is our counsel from KP Law, who's our typical land use and will be with us for most of our land use matters. So welcome, Carolyn, and thank you for joining us.
And excuse me, Paul Colery, did you say that you already know Carolyn? Or I'd like to introduce you if you haven't.
No, I was here at the last planning board
Yep.
meeting. I got to kind of meet her, but not really. But then I think on another board, which one was that, Carolyn? I forget now.
Well, I think we have a common acquaintance in the planning director in Braintree from like an affordable housing, a regional affordable housing committee that apparently you both were involved with.
That's right. And also, I
Yeah.
think you were at our Affordable Housing Steering Committee meeting, I think. I don't remember. But anyway, it's good to see you
Okay.
again. Welcome.
Nice to see you as well.
All right, great.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Murray. So Lauren, will you bring us into 808 Chief Justice Highway?
Yes, thank you. So the next item on our agenda is a continued public hearing for a site plan review for 808 Chief Justice Cushing Highway. The applicant has submitted a request to continue this to the October 6th meeting as they are awaiting a final report for their traffic engineers as requested at the last time that they were present before the board. So I would recommend that we don't deliberate on this evening and that we continue this to October 6th at 6:30.
All right, thank you. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Clark Brewer,
Aye.
Tom Callahan,
Aye.
Paul Grady,
Aye.
Eric Potter,
Aye.
Glassmeyer. Thank you very much. All right, Lauren, will you bring us into Situate Hill?
Certainly, thank you. The next item on our agenda is a continued hearing for site plan review for 20, 25, and 30 Situate Hill. I'm going to promote a couple of people who are here on behalf of this application, starting with the applicant Mark Treiter, Chris Nowak from his engineering team. We have Peter Ellison from TEC, who is our peer review lead on our peer review engineering firm. And I cannot pronounce Mr. Strikovsky's last name, but I'm going to promote him. And then, Mark, if you could please let me know if there's anyone else that should be here on behalf of your application.
I missed the roll call a little bit, but I know Mr. Rob Schwant is going to be joining if you did not see him.
I don't see him yet. There's
Okay.
is Matt Keeley with you as well?
He is, yes, please. Yep.
All right, and then Michael Kim or Thomas May and the attendees.
Thomas May, please.
Certainly. All right, and then with
And,
that,
that's Michael Kim. I'm sorry. Yes, please. Yep.
okay, yes, certainly. So that is the team that we have tonight. And again, just a reminder for the board that Peter Ellison is the town's peer review from TEC. He's here to speak as necessary. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Treiter to continue with this public hearing.
Excellent. Thank you. I was really planning to just turn it over to Walter and to Chris, who will do the majority of the speaking tonight on what I think are, hopefully, very few outstanding items that we've addressed and have communicated. Thank you, Lauren, for your communications. The organized nature of your communications were very helpful. And and I'll let those guys take it from here.
All right, who will be speaking first?
Walter, are you out there?
Doesn't appear that Walter is here with us. He's not in the attendee section.
That's interesting.
Lost
People
without-
do occasionally get lost in Zoom.
Maybe he was booted. I think we could Chris, I think that we could just jump right in, right? Based
Sure.
on our conversation earlier. Go right ahead.
Good evening, Chris Novak from VHP. There's been a lot of back and forth. I think it's been very productive couple of weeks since our last hearing. Thank you, Lauren, for kind of quarterbacking those comments that Mark and myself have responded to in regards to the coordination with the fire department and some of the other questions that were asked by the board. We're happy to follow up on any of those questions. I don't know if the material was, I assume the material was distributed and read by the board. We're happy to answer any additional questions. In addition, we received a letter from TEC in response to the package that we had submitted responding to their initial comment letter. We received that letter on Friday. We didn't have time to resubmit formally, but we have had time to review the comments. Any remaining comments appeared to be fairly minor in nature, and I think that after reviewing the drawings, we feel confident that we can address all those satisfactorily to TEC. We can address TEC's comments satisfactorily. So we would ask that. Sorry, did you have a question?
Thank you. Yes, I was just going to suggest that we had some information come over today that spoke to a couple of questions raised by one of our members since our last hearing, but the board just got it today. So if you could just review that information for everyone's benefit in case they didn't have a time to really digest, that would be really helpful. And that's regarding, there's some questions about ADA compliance versus MAAB and parking grade.
Sure. So I'll handle the parking grade question first. I think the question was asked, what was the maximum design slope that was used on site? The maximum slope, I can actually present the grading plan here. As a little bit of background, there's approximately 125 feet in elevation change from this portion of the site, which is within the existing detention basin, to the southern tip of the site. So as you know, it's a hillside. It's fairly steep topography. Within the area that we're working, our entrance drive is around elevation 78. And then there's about a 60-foot zone where we're doing work. So the back of the site, the existing grade is 138. So there's about a 60-foot realized elevation change across the site in order to achieve the program. What we've proposed is the majority of the roadway on site is less than 5%. So all of this roadway down here, and then the uppermost roadway. There are 5 short sections of driveway that we use to climb up an elevation. And I think most folks are aware that these buildings are split. So it's essentially a low front portion of the building, and then there's a change in elevation. So there's a 10-foot split from this road to this road. We're using these 5 ramp sections to achieve that split elevation across the building. And each one of those sections has been designed at a grade of approximately 10%. There was some question as to whether or not that met the zoning bylaws. There's no specified grade in the zoning bylaws. I believe what was sent to me as a reference was the subdivision standards, which we have not designed these driveways as subdivision roadways. We did, however, follow the guidelines of Mass DOT and AASHTO for 20-mile-per-hour roadways. And our design speed's actually a little less than that, 15 mile per hour. But those design standards allow us to go up to an 11% grade for these short stretches, less than 500 feet. And as I mentioned, I think our longest section is less than 160 feet. So that is our response for the grade of the roadways on the site. I believe the other question was in regards to the applicable design standards for accessibility. I can let Sevi speak to the architecture, anything internal to the building, but we will comply with the appropriate code, on the site design. So whatever is required for that standard, we will provide handrails that meet that standard.
Clark Brewer, since I believe those were your comments, would you like to speak further to them?
I did see the response on the handicap accessibility conformance to MAAB. And I think that's adequate. I just wanted to make them aware that their standard ADA detail wasn't the same as what's required by Massachusetts, which might affect their overall layout of their ramp, since they have a lot of ramp in the middle of the site. So I think that's an adequate answer. I think I would like in terms of the road slope. This isn't a subdivision per se. I mean, AASHTO, what does that stand for again? That's an industry standard, right?
It's an industry standard, yeah.
And what does it mean, AASHTO?
Matt, you want to help me out so that I get it right?
Sorry.
Yeah,
I'll let the traffic engineer answer.
American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials.
Okay, and so they say that like a 10% slope is for a roadway of this type, which is a slow roadway. I mean, no doubt about it. It's, it's a 20-mile-an-hour roadway maximum. You might even have it 15 when you really get into it. But you guys don't have any safety concerns for those steep slope areas in terms of this. There are no hidden obstructions or anything where the steep slope is. There's not going to be like bushes and stuff so that you wouldn't be able to see oncoming cars. I mean, the combination.
Right,
of
there's
steep slope
a couple
and-
questions there. I was just trying to figure out what to answer first. We're comfortable that it meets the industry standard, and is.
But the
as far
radius,
as the
radius would be, you think it's safe? I guess what I'm asking, I want to make sure that you don't have conflicts in terms of cars going in both directions with the steep slope. I mean, you've got a 24-foot drive aisle, if I remember correctly.
Yes, right,
which
and
is plenty
and a
of
lot of
width.
these are at stop conditions, these intersections.
Yeah. So you believe the
Right.
steep slope doesn't make it unsafe?
Now we're comfortable with the slopes.
Okay. And I think that the other question that I had that I think maybe Sevi was going to get into first had to do with the net square footage calculation and how it impacts the parking count. Do you want me to?
Yes, let me address that. These are unique workspaces where they have individual entrances that include a storage, toilets, mechanical, and an entryway that is not office space. And the difference between these buildings and your typical center entrance office building where you have centralized toilets, entry, mechanical, and circulation, is that when they're individually designed this way, each building it loses the efficiency, so that the net to gross ratio, the actual workspace is approximately 200 square feet. And there's a large amount of entry space that is not appropriate for workspace. It's it's what makes these buildings unique. We have given overall net to gross ratios of all buildings on the site. And we have a net occupiable, usable total square footage of approximately 15,000 square feet, which at 200 square feet is 75 cars. And that includes the conference center and the quadruplexes, duplexes, as well. Even there's a pavilion on top of the site. So we feel that for this type of building, this unique tech office park, that the net to gross is really not something that needs to be considered alongside your typical office building. And the utilization of the buildings is not a 9 to 5 kind of a program. It'll be intermittent. It will not be every day. I mean, this kind of remote workspace environment, which is very much coming into practice in development and usage, is a different program, which reduces our parking needs from what you would normally see in a large conventional building, office building.
Clark, does that satisfy your question?
Well, they did do an Excel spreadsheet with the square footages breakdown, and like the total square footage of the typical workspace is at 374. That's gross outside of wall. But then they net out walls, which they can do according to our bylaw, and they net out the restroom, and they have a workspace that's 207 square feet, which is pretty close to our one parking space per 200 square feet in the technology business district that this is in. The only caveat that I'd like and to discuss with the board and council would be that our bylaw actually does define net floor area for the purpose of the calculation, and industry standards for net to gross usually is a BOMA, building owners and managers association calculation, and I've done these for office buildings in the past, and this is a very different type of office building. But based on our bylaw, we have a specific calculation for any usable, I think it's called any areas usable for human occupancy. And that would be different than a BOMA calculation. And it would be also different than what was put together in the spreadsheet. And I think it probably deserves discussion.
If I could add something on that subject,
Can I ask
Michael
Bert
Kemp.
who's speaking?
It's Michael Kim with Strzekalowski Architecture.
Thank you. We just need to keep that on the record.
Yes, thank you very much. There is in the zoning code under Chapter 7 in parking, paragraph I, which allows for other permissible uses. And it simply has to be established that the parking is sufficient for, as it says, occupants, employees, members, customers, clients, or visitors of the premises. So while this is a tech-centered office space, it can also be classified as other permitted uses, and it doesn't seem that anyone has a problem with the use. So in the zoning code, there is the vehicle for some flexibility. Particularly, this is an office, but it's not like any other office you've seen.
All right, I'd like to further Clark's query to Carolyn Murray for some insights about this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do see that, you know, the parking table does allow for other permitted uses, as the applicant's representative was just saying. Ultimately, I think that is something that the planning board needs to decide. Is this more akin to a traditional office as defined in paragraph G, which would require one space for each 200 square feet of net floor area in the tech business zone? Or do you think that this is not really quite the type of office space that was envisioned when the parking table was put together, such that this could be some other type of permissible use? But also, having said that, unless I misunderstood the reading of Tech's September 15th supplemental report, it seemed to me that our peer reviewer was at least going to defer to the building inspector as to whether or not the building inspector agreed with the net square footage calculations. But to the extent that the applicant has correctly calculated net square footage, TEC appeared to agree that the 80 parking spaces was sufficient.
Right, Clark Brewer, you wish to respond?
So in 700 in the zoning bylaw, Article 7, in subsection G, it does say offices, but you know, I suppose it makes sense for the board to discuss whether the definition or the requirement for parking under this subsection G with the technology business district at a ratio of 1 to 200 for net floor area. Net floor area is the guiding definition, or whether we would think that the subsection I of that section 7, which allows, which defines all other permitted or permissible uses, that this is different enough from a standard office building to take that into account. I think that's worth discussing. I mean, I've got the zoning bylaw in front of me and out, but I'd be interested in what the other planning board members think.
I'd like a point of information, which is the assumption that each unit will have one occupant in it only?
That's the assumption we would like to put out there for you, yes. And I just would add that, you know, just the way I've been thinking about it for what it matters to the board, is that the addition of a bathroom doesn't, to me, seem to be create a need for additional parking. It's a bathroom area. It's not going to create a new person coming to the unit. So from that respect, and from how we've been designing and planning this and moving forward through this, we felt that using BOMA would be the most appropriate application of the standard and interpretation here.
So another point of information, how are you going to regulate a single person occupying a space like this? Are you going to require that individuals who actually either rent or own one allow only themselves to occupy it?
Yes, they'll be controlled through leases, lease agreements, and access control to the units themselves. So an occupant, only that person. In our plan, we have smartphone controlled, door access, which is now the trend and what's very favorable to people in office buildings around, the country. And that's how we're going to limit occupancy and access to these units through leases and then through controlled secured access. And with that lease agreement, that person will have, a designated area in which they'll park. That's going to be worked out, but I'm thinking that the bays that are closest to each unit will be designated in some type of color coding or some type of alphabetical structure that allows that person to always have access to that particular bay of parking that's associated with that unit that they're occupying. So
another point of information, do you have any examples where that level of control over a workspace has operated in such a manner that it is an effective experience for someone who would be either leasing or owning a site like that?
I don't really have a relevant office example. I could point to the hotel bylaw for Cohasset has one-to-one parking, for example, which is a little bit more, barring any, we're not talking about any sleeping or overnight staying. I want to take that, of course, out of the picture completely, but it's intended for, one-to-one usage. There are other controlled parking environments, but this will be, I think, just in nature. There'll be on a daily basis, and I think we've all kind of agreed upon this, but there'll be excess parking to be available to people. I don't think this is going to become the type of use where you pull in and you'll be driving around searching for a spot. So I don't really have any exact examples, no, where people are controlling office space parking that intensely.
All right, thank you. Would other members of the board, Paul Grady?
Just a question. Have you taken into account business partners, lawyers, husband, wife teams, anything like that?
Yes. And
I was pulling up, I'm not saying this, and I'm not, I'm going to pull right next to my business partner or something like that. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You say it's
Yep.
going to be occupied by one single person. I have trouble seeing how you're going to patrol that or how you're going to monitor that.
Yeah. And it may present itself in the operation of the system where parking is necessary. And I can't really argue with any relevant data points or with any certainty to you that there may be days that there's going to be parking constraints, and maybe, Walter, we could talk a little bit of some of the conversations we've had in terms of compensating for that.
So would you be seeing, when you mentioned it earlier, would you be structuring your leases so it is a single person occupied?
That's the
This is Walter Sullivan speaking. I think what we believe, Mr. Grady, is that the size of these units, which is very modest, was going to sort of dictate that you couldn't really have a lot of people in them. But something that we've discussed that maybe the board would consider is that, we could, to the satisfaction of the building inspector, have a monitoring agreement with him. And if parking became a problem, we could look to supplement what we have on site with some type of off-site parking if it's not working. We don't expect that to be the case, but we certainly wouldn't have a problem with that kind of a condition.
Have you kicked around the possibility of like a you know, an electric shuttle bus or something like that, that could, and the adjacent medical building, that parking lot's never full. TEC did mention something about potentially like setting up an area for future parking. I think these are worthy to pursue if necessary because I really, I mean, if you have a lawyer who has a paralegal and they really need to work together and the lawyer's in court half the time and the paralegal's there all the time, then it makes sense to not have one person in these suites, because then you can't collaborate effectively. Even an architect or an engineer might have a draftsman, and the principal might be in and out for, you know, site meetings and things with clients. But those, you know, I wouldn't want at the get-go to have such severe limitations on a robust collaborative uses that it makes it difficult for you as a part of the concept of the project.
Yeah, so again, what we were thinking, Mr. Brewer, is that, you know, if in fact we believed, or if the town believed that there was a problem up there with space, we would be willing to make arrangements for offsite parking and bringing people on. And yes, more directly to your inquiry, Mr. Brewer, we have made inquiry about trying to find offsite parking, but we haven't been able to resolve that as of yet. But if we had to go offsite and bring people in by shuttle, that's certainly what we would do. We do believe that we're going to have enough parking, though, based on our business plan.
Sure. Have you considered at all making the roadways one way? Because you could pick up parallel parking along all your roadways if you did make them one way, I think, and conform to zoning.
Chris,
I
do
mean,
you
not
want
on the steep parts, but in the flatter sections. Has that been kicked around at all?
I think, Clark, what we should do is, I'd like you to consider how you'd like to condition this, if you're planning to do that. Because I don't think we want to be ourselves designing the project for them.
No, I don't. I'm just asking about options and what they've thought about for parking options, and what might work to dissuade any reservations about the parking solution.
Yeah, we appreciate the interest and suggestion, and yes, we have kicked it around. And Chris, maybe you could quickly supply some comment on why that was deemed not a feasible.
I think the challenge is providing a route to the units. I mean, making it all one way and potentially adding a little bit of parallel parking. It's interesting. We've studied similar concepts. We haven't studied that one specifically, but I know that when we looked at our pedestrian crossings of the roadways and connections to the buildings, it becomes a challenge. The slopes and the grading on site are a bit of a barrier in some places.
All right. Are there other comments from planning board members about this? Tom Callahan?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking, over the years, there's been criticism about our commercial parking requirements. Maybe they're too much, maybe not enough, but I can't, we're not here to rewrite the zoning bylaw. And this is an office. I can't see twisting it into any other definition. And I don't want to start getting into some precedent of twisting subsection I in the chart into, everything else that people don't like about the rest of the chart. If we need to review our parking standards, that's a whole nother process. But this is an office to me, and I think subsection G should be adhered to. But then I'm looking at 7.2J, which allows for some of these spaces not to be paved initially. So to the extent that there's deemed to be excess parking, that some of it, at our discretion, could be left unpaved and be green space.
That's like reserve parking.
Yeah, it's like reserve parking, and then, you know, maybe we stick to the, well, I think we have to, I don't think we have a choice but to stick to the one every 200 square feet. But perhaps we can let some of it be reserved rather than actually built. And then what Walter's suggesting, you know, future study, if more parking is needed, then you open up the reserve. If I recall, I think that was the initial approach to the Stop and Shop Plaza a long, long time ago. That some of the green space there is actually reserved parking. I'd entertain that, but I wouldn't entertain twisting subsection I in the chart as a substitute for subsection G. This is an office. It's very simple, common sense that these are office spaces.
So Tom, are you making a recommendation relative to what the current plan says?
Well, I'm not suggesting we deviate from subsection G at all, but I'm willing to entertain as a condition going to applying 7.2J.
Madam Chair, could I just comment on that for a moment?
Yes, okay.
Thank you. As I read 7.2J, it specifically excludes the technology business district from that sort of banked parking provision.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. I'm sorry, my bad. Never mind then.
Sorry.
Never
No,
mind.
it's after our last meeting with Mr. Brewer's question, I took a look at that, and I just don't see that that's an available option for this
All right, well,
particular
that's
zoning
fine.
district.
That's fine, my bad, but I still stick to that I don't think we can deviate that this falls under subsection G. I don't think we can deviate from that at all. And
So,
we'd set a
Tom,
bad precedent if we did.
can you specify what by not deviating means? Can you say something definitive?
That means they have to develop one space per every 200 square feet. However, you're calculating their total square footage or net square footage.
All right, so why don't we leave this one for just a minute, unless there's another planning board member who would like to speak to this specific issue. All right, not hearing anybody. Clark, you have-
Paul raised his hand.
Oh, sorry, I didn't.
Oh, Larry did.
I can't see it. I can't
That's
see it.
okay. Thank you, Clark. Thank you, Madam Chair. I virtually raised my hand and physically raised my hand.
Yeah, it's just that you didn't come up on the screen. That's the problem.
I was giving myself a high five. So can somebody just tell me, just point of reference, are we talking about having 80 parking spots or having 75 and we're meant to need 80? Could someone just recap just real quick?
I'd love for Chris to answer that, if we could. He's got the plan, and Chris, you're muted, but our plan has 70 units, and I think it's 80.
80 parking spaces are shown.
Right.
And so what's the problem?
The problem is in the strict interpretation of the definition of net square footage, which in the bylaw would include bathrooms as usable square footage, but in most any other real estate standard, those would be excluded, including BOMA, which, you know, Clark, I think you'd agree is a pretty commonly referenced.
That is the case. Bathrooms, like core functions, would be excluded from the office net usable square footage calculation by BOMA.
Right. And if I may, just one more thing to add there is that if this project were to run at 90% occupancy, you're talking about, you know, another 7 spots at 85%. It's another 10 spots available. So then you'd have an excess of 20 spaces in that instance on 60 occupied units. So, you know, that's where we're asking, I guess, for some good practical thinking surrounding this parking, in particular in light of the fact that these will predominantly be used and controlled as single occupant units. So
I appreciate your problem, but I don't think that's how we deal with the bylaw and need, maybe our bylaw needs changing, like I said, but this is not the way to do it. Unfortunately, I just don't see that we can do it. Sets a bad precedent.
Just
So-
as a point of order, I thought in the past, we talked about how the board had granted certain waivers for parking spaces in certain instances, and it strikes me, Mr. Kelly, and that's precisely what in the bylaw paragraph I speaks to is to, sometimes it's apples and oranges, and if you have something that's unique, it's supposed to give some flexibility to the planning board to grant waivers.
Well, in discussion with another board where we're talking about the rewrite of the bylaw, we're discussing waivers, and I don't think we have the authority to grant any waivers under the bylaw. And again, it's clear that the bylaw describes offices. I don't even know what the bylaw means by all other permitted or permissible uses, but it clearly has a section that applies to offices, and you can't tell me this is not an office. You could say it's something new, it's a new concept of office, but it's still an office. And
Hey, Tom, they're not actually asking for relief for the 1 to 200 ratio. But what they are doing is they're saying that their suites are 207 square feet of usable office space. And so that one suite per parking space is works for them. And in fact, they exceed it by 10 spots. So
again,
it's a fine grain issue, but if you accept their calculation for net square footage, then they're complying to the 1 to 200 ratio under section G.
That's why I was confused, and that's why I raised the point. It seems to me like they're in compliance, and why would we get in the way?
because somebody brought up subsection I, and I don't know why. If they're in compliance, why are we discussing it?
I'm totally confused. Like, I literally thought that they checked the boxes. And then if not, I would suggest maybe, is it that extra 7 square feet that may be triggering a problem? But it's not a problem. I mean, they
Not
have
really.
10
All
extra
right,
spots.
so are we going around in circles and is it?
No,
time to
we're
vote?
discussing, we're having a discussion. It's good.
We are in
good.
circles.
Well, we are repeating ourselves and now we have 2 different points of view and it does not seem that we
I
have a
don't think
means
so.
by which we can reconcile. If there's
I don't
only
think it's a
one-
different point of view at all. They comply with the 1 to 200 ratio required by technology business. If you accept their calculation of net square footage for their office suite.
And do you accept their net square footage?
Well,
For the
I'd still like to work through it with the rest of the board.
All right, so that
Well,
makes,
Can I understand where we are? Are they trying to exclude the bathrooms from the net square footage? Is that
Yeah,
what
and I
we're-
think, and that's okay. I guess the question would be, does their entry really would that be excluded from their net square footage? Because the bylaw does say in the definitions under floor area net that it's any usable.
All right. Well, again, this is not a place to be rewriting the bylaw.
Any area is usable for human occupancy. Typically by BOMA, you would exclude a bathroom, core, walls, things like that.
all right, so can we get an opinion from council?
Or a recommendation?
Or a
If I,
recommendation?
Madam Chair, if I could just add to, and I know the board's aware of it, but I do think your consultant has found that they believe parking is sufficient.
I guess straight answer, are we getting the conclusion that the number is sufficient, including bathrooms in the entryways or not?
Well, they said, TEC said they think there's enough parking for the intended use.
Right.
As a
Well,
blanket,
that-
that's our consultant making a recommendation to the board about this issue.
That's a recommendation. The question is, what does the board wish to do? And I hear that there's at least one member of the board that is concerned that there is an insufficient amount of parking based on the existing zoning bylaw.
I don't know that. I don't know that yet because nobody's giving me an answer to my question, but
So state your question again, please.
is the conclusion that there is adequate parking at the 1 to every 200 square foot ratio being made, including or excluding the entryways and the bathrooms?
Excluding. We'll tell you. Yep, that's in the,
Okay.
yep.
If they were included, how many more spaces are needed?
Roughly 43 more spaces. Yeah.
I sympathize with your problem. And this may be one of those examples that I mentioned had come up over the years where the bylaw is probably requiring too much in the way of spaces. But I don't think we have the power to alter the bylaw, unfortunately. I'm gonna rest on that technicality that we don't have the power to alter the bylaw by this decision-making process.
Making a motion or something? Would
I'm
you
not
like-
making a motion because we're not at the stage of writing conditions. When we get to that stage, if this remains an issue, I'll deal with it at that time, but I'm not. making a
Chairman
motion.
Glassmeyer, are you trying to close the,
No, what
Hearing?
I'm trying, no, we're going around in circles. And so what I'd like to do is to be able to move on to other items that people might have something to say about.
Then let's move on.
Well, you know,
I haven't had an opportunity to say a thing.
Have you raised your hand?
I have, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if
Eric's turn.
I could speak, so I totally agree with for whatever it's worth, but I totally agree with Clark that it's, you know, I mean, I see where you're coming from, Tom, but I do believe that the 1 to 2 space calculation is fine. You can, excluding the bathroom. I don't see how that should negatively impact the applicant there. But I do think they are tight on overall parking spaces. If you just do simple math of, like, you know, percentages of occupants at any one time, and then there's not just going to be one person and at least, you know, a certain percentage of those, and then on top of that, a client may be coming. I think there's still, you know, about 10 to 15 parking spaces away from, you know, this working out smoothly long term, but that's all I got.
Right, Carolyn?
Sorry, my unmute button didn't want to work there for a moment. This is really more of a question or a thought more than anything else on this. But as I said, I think Peter Ellison is here and could speak to TEC's comment. But also, I don't know whether or not our building inspector has actually looked at the parking or the net square footage calculation. I mean, do we know whether things like bathrooms have been included or excluded in the past? You know, I realize that the bylaw, the definition does include places that are, you know, fit for human occupancy are to be included in the calculation. And certainly we would all agree that yes, a bathroom is fit for human occupancy. But if there is, you know, if it has traditionally been interpreted by, say, the building inspector that bathrooms and the like are also the types of spaces that are excluded from the calculation, I think that would be helpful for the board to know.
He doesn't have the history in town to have made those determinations yet. He hasn't been here long enough to have done that. We don't get that many office applications, so.
Well, we do have written records for the office applications that we've had. So it doesn't seem like this can be solved at this moment. I think what we need to do is to consult with the building inspector and also have a reconfirmation of the square footage and then return to this issue, and let's move on.
May I just, I'm so sorry to even ask, but would it, and it's difficult, I understand, for people to go past their authority and out on a limb at all. And we don't expect that. What we'd like to do is maybe offer a compromise in terms of a condition where we monitor the parking. There are services that are provided daily by commercial real estate service providers, even VHB here, that could conduct really accurate and reliable information on what the parking has looked like. And if we come up with a solution that we've been working towards in earnest anyway, that would allow for us to find excess parking elsewhere if needed based on counts, we would be, that would be our condition.
Mark,
You know,
are you saying you could pull together some case studies that
well,
would
what
help?
what I would do is, my suggestion would be to approve the site plan as it is. If our parking monitoring demonstrates that it is at a deficit, and we could do this on some schedule that is acceptable to the board, annually, biannually, whatever it may be, and it's observed that there's a deficit and it's tight and there's improper parking methods being taken by customers, then we'll go ahead and execute on a off-site parking solution that can be palatable to all.
Callahan?
I don't find that acceptable because we're never going to know that they have a problem with the parking capacity until they're at full capacity. And I think it's incredibly speculative of how far off in the future that is. So we for years could be waiting till they hit capacity and potentially a problem. In the meantime, we've set a precedent of deviating from the bylaw when we don't have the authority to do so. I wouldn't go down that road. This is still a very highly speculative use. It's a use allowed under a bylaw, but it's still highly speculative. And we're years away from full occupancy, I think.
I would just make one comment, which is if this was an issue of 2 or 3 or 10 spaces, it wouldn't necessarily have the same impact, but you're talking about half as many additional spaces that could be required. So it's not a small deviation, it's a significant deviation.
Related to this is if a request for a special permit or a waiver of the parking requirement in lieu of something else was asked for, is that under our jurisdiction or is that the zoning board of appeals? And I think Carolyn weighed in on this last time.
We don't have.
Correct, Madam Chair, through you. No, the planning board doesn't have any authority to waive or to allow for like the banked parking or to grant a variance. So if there's going to be less than the required parking provided, they would have to go to the zoning board of appeals for a variance.
And really, I think it comes down to, do the entry square footage of 70 square foot count or not? I mean, I think that's what this comes down to for me.
But our definition says that it does.
Right.
And our definition didn't know about that architectural board that you referred to earlier, or they ignored it. I think perhaps, we all work together to change the bylaw. Maybe that's it, because again, I remember
that doesn't count that doesn't help this applicant.
Well, it helps the applicant that if the bylaw was changed next spring and it reduced either change the definition of what's included in net floor area for commercial space, or it reduced the 1 per 200 to something else, or expanded, whatever I'm thinking, go in the other direction. This project isn't going to be built like instantly before next spring's town meeting. They could then come for a modification of our permit in light of the new bylaw. But I just don't want to get down to the precedent of changing bylaws as in the context of a decision. We can't do it. As much as I might agree that it did, this came up years and years ago with Stop and Shop, but Stop and Shop had way too many spaces than it needed. And that We all know that that lot is never completely filled. We all know that that's probably true, but the bylaw has remained as it has in the 3 decades since Stop and Shop was built. So maybe this is an occasion for us to revisit it. We are engaged in a complete rewrite of the bylaw. I can tell you in the drafts, the parking hasn't been touched yet because nobody has suggested we need to change them, but maybe we do. Maybe we need, in the commercial context, we need to make some changes here. But doing it in a decision is not the way to do it. That's all.
So in the interest of our timing, if we were to get a solution for, let's just say 20 additional parking spaces, or, can we find a solution that will allow us to continue and get, our risks mitigated and our project timing in line with where we hoped it would be. If we can come back or be conditioned to find additional parking solution for the amount of spaces that you guys are feeling would be enough to relieve the stress over this particular item, I would ask that we have that be our moving forward solution, if respectfully.
I recommend that you come back to the planning board with a set of suggestions about how you might solve this problem.
That makes sense.
I think that's really the means by which we can move forward.
Okay, and if I may, we have gone through this conversation and we've identified areas where we think this could occur on a neighboring property. And, there's some ways to go to come to an agreement on that. If we came back with reasonable, there's going to be some civil engineering to occur to understand whether or not that is buildable, which will take some time. I'm hoping that we might be able to present the solution with reasonable assurance that it can be engineered and move forward in that direction. That's what I'm hoping the board may expect from us, if I could ask that.
I think that the board would entertain recommendations that you make. We're
Okay.
not here to stop your project. We're here to help you make your project and to make it as good as it possibly can be. All right, so thank you very much. And now let's move on to other items that individuals might have something to say about. Are there other planning board members that have items they'd like to raise? Well, I do. So okay, Tom Callahan.
Yeah, no, you can go first, Amy. Go ahead.
All right, so I have a set of items which really are just sort of closing loops that in thinking about the project and its operations would be important for the town. And so they will sound quite formulaic, or maybe they'll sound very direct, but that is how I'm going to describe them. So I'm going to presume that you're going to conduct a safety check using standards related to public health, disability, fire safety, building code, and regulations related to occupancy information according to Assistant Fire Chief John Dockeray. Do you have that list of items? If not, you can get them from him or we can give them to you.
Yeah.
In terms of fire safety, due to the size of the individual buildings, they're not sprinklered. Applicant, what is your plan in terms of a fire safety plan provided to and approved by the fire department? Do you have that yet? If not, you can inquire about it. In terms of the building code, compliance with the building codes, a statement that the applicant upon occupancy will have the responsibility to comply with the fire code usage of the buildings. That will be something that you will need to have. On-site storage, a statement that the applicant will adhere to the building code regarding different types of allowable storage. For example, things should be excluded that include such items as holding inventory for small businesses, holding flammable materials on site, things which could be a hazard to others. In terms of occupancy, that the applicant must clarify whether the project units will be occupied by status. Will there be rentals? Will there be ownership? Applicant needs to provide a plan for specification based on one or the other or both. Do you have that? And will we have that when we condition the project? Will you explain to the board how will the applicant ensure that the business is not used as a resident, not an overnight sleeping facility? Do you have plans for that? That will be important to be included. In terms of public health, have you looked at the square footage compliance with public health? A statement that the square footage occupancy space will follow standards set by the fire department and the Department of Public Health. Clark spoke to ADA compliance. Do you intend to, if you are going to have a handicap bathroom, are you also intending to have an ADA compliant bathtub or shower as would be expected if it's going to be an ADA bathroom? Do you have the evidence for that for us to be able to be sure that that's going to happen? In terms of the grade, the site has varying grade. Fire department accepts a grade of 6% or less. If the grade will be exceeded, can you explain why, where and why? And also explain how occupants will be able to move along the public way. You did explain various aspects of that, but the question is the way in which you see the grade going to have any instance where there's going to be a problem that you need to anticipate? In terms of drainage, explain the drainage plan for the site. At this point, we haven't seen anything about the drainage plan for the site. We don't know anything about
The drainage was peer reviewed, madam. That was part of the peer review.
All right.
Would you like us to respond to any of these, or?
Well, I just want to say them into the record, and I'll give you the document that I wrote, because these are simply items that when we go to condition things, even if they're provided to us by the peer review, there are details which may be important for us to be assured that the public safety and the use and the user safety is experienced. One question, for example, is how much geotechnical work did you do on the site, or did the peer review do on the site to know what the composition of the subsurface rock is? It's a slope, and it's got a certain kind of character to it. Is that an issue that needs to be addressed given rain and variable climate?
There was a geotechnical consultant engaged for the project, and they did subsurface exploration.
They did. All right. Thank you. And then in terms of the foundation, are these going to be slabs, or are they going to be subsurface foundations?
Well, let's have you address that one.
We show that in the drawings, Madam Chairman. It's there's slab and grade.
All right. And so there was sufficient drainage designed into the foundations on the basis of them being slabs.
That's correct. And the buildings are designed to fit into a sloping site. So it's very integrated architecturally with the site.
All right. Thank you. And then in terms of fire hydrants, do we have those marked on plans so that we know what the access will be for the fire department?
Yes, and we've reviewed those with Assistant Chief Dockery, and
All
he's
right.
agreed to the locations.
All right, thank you. So those are just items that would be useful to have for you to think about. We will think about them too in terms of conditioning. Other planning board members? Tom Callahan?
Looking ahead to conditions, I mean, I've always been concerned about the lot coverage. And I just want to remind everyone that our new lot coverage bylaw that passed last spring has come into effect. And for the developer, that means not doing site work and start clearing without any permissions of at least the building inspector. So I just wanted to be aware of that. My other concern in conditioning this project is going to be about the intersection with 3A. And I was given a piece of a document that I guess our consultants TEC did, but it may have been separate from this project, and it may have been in connection with the state's, beginning to look at the 3A North section. And it's a document that maybe TEC can confirm. It's dated August 30th, 2021. It's got 34 pages. And on page 29 of that document, it talks about, the inadequacies of this intersection, but it makes some short-term recommendations. Obviously the state is not far enough along in its design process to know how this intersection is ultimately going to look. But, there's some short-term suggestions here and other things we've discussed about the sight lines that, I'm going to be interested in adding as conditions just to make sure that until that section of 3A is redesigned, that this intersection be as safe as possible. So I'm just going to bring that up. Again, TEC may comment on who they generated this document for. It's called a preliminary corridor traffic evaluation. I think they were doing it for the town and submitting it to the state, but it's something that maybe we should circulate for people's consideration, at least this page 29.
So TEC had recommended that we remove some vegetation to improve the sight line at that intersection where the vegetation's on our property, which was part of the recent comment letter, and we have no issue with that.
Yeah,
some of those sightline issues are existing. The subdivision road is not part of this project. It's off-site. It's not, and the adjacent brass kettle sign is not something that is owned by the applicant of this project.
No, I'm aware of that, but I mean, I would like to see you, perhaps a condition where you're working cooperatively with the abutting property owners and/or the town to, make regular maintenance of the brush that's obstructing some of the sight lines. One of the other short-term solutions in this TEC letter was install a stop sign and stop line on the Situate Hill commercial driveway approach. There were other, that was one that I don't know whether that can be done, or why it shouldn't be done, but it needs to be safe going out of this street, because the TEC's findings are that this intersection is below acceptable safety standards. So, I mean, it's just something I'm concerned about, and we can discuss when we get to conditions, but it is a concern of mine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other comments? I have a comment for Clark. Clark, what is the relationship between the tech zone and a subdivision?
Sorry.
So why in the end is this project not considered a subdivision?
Residential, right?
What'd you say?
You can have a commercial subdivision.
Well, my understanding is that there is no difference in Cohasset between a residential subdivision and a commercial subdivision.
So a subdivision, a subdivision is when you're, well, when you're creating a subdivision road for the purposes of creating frontage, legal frontage, and redrawing property lines, creating lots. That's a different mechanism than site plan approval. So we're proposing a private development on a lot. We're not creating a road, a public roadway for the
Wouldn't a
purposes of
subdivision
frontage.
Wouldn't a subdivision mean that they were, like if there were 70 individual units for sale, that would mean that there would be 70 different owners and maybe.
Right, we're not creating legal lots.
Yeah, you're not, even though there's different units, they're still
It's still
fall
one.
on, just the way in which they're building it. So that doesn't fall into like a, subdivision that they're gonna be sold off.
Didn't we do an A&R recently to combine lots here on this road? Wasn't when this road built, a subdivision was created with like 8 lots and
That's
now.
right. That's
And in
right.
the
That
recent
was,
in the recent A&R, we combined them, and if the combination was to get away from the subdivision rules, now I'm upset, but I you know, I thought this was a subdivision at some point in the past.
it was a commercial subdivision, not a residential one. And each lot that was created had the required frontage, but combining them would, if for one bigger property, would only help the zoning requirements of frontage and area and things like that.
Well, to the extent anything in the subdivision rules and regs would apply here that are now not applying, it would be getting around them, but I don't think that nothing's jumping out at me that would be the case, but you know, it was a subdivision at one point, so.
Yeah, and just to give you guys a little color on where we're coming from is that I anyway embarked on this project understanding that a subdivision had been created and approved on which we could locate a commercial property. And when I entered into negotiations with the seller, I reviewed many conditional approvals over what would be required to create a subdivision in terms of traffic, sight lines, applications to the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, which was satisfied. And if I thought, that there would be too restrictive of a condition placed upon a roadway that we really have no control over and property neighboring us that we have no right to alter in any way, I don't know. I hope the board will be cognizant of that as we go through this approval process, is that this is an existing roadway that was voted upon in 2006, and we're only creating a driveway off of it to create a commercial real estate development.
So am I to conclude that this is not a subdivision?
Correct.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
I think that's reasonable. Although the subdivision roadway that was created years ago, that has to still be completed. And the paint and stop
I
sign
think that
need to be completed, but that's not this applicant. And then finally, as a subdivision roadway, this should eventually be accepted by the town as a public way. Although it's been like 30 years since the town's accepted any subdivision roadways as public ways.
was the road built to the subdivision standards has it been built to?
I believe so, yeah. Yeah,
All right.
and
Then-
Modulewski was out there inspecting it, and the big holdup on the final paving was that running utilities, the electric company wouldn't run power to this particular site unless there was buildings there or a planned project. They didn't want to run speculative, so they didn't want a final pave. That's not the town's problem. That's not the planning board's problem. It's whoever the owner of the original subdivision or what remains of it. It's their responsibility.
If it's built and completed to the subdivision standards on which it was permitted, I'm fine with that. That would probably be the main thing somebody would be trying to get around, is to build a subdivision standard of roadway. If it's there and it just needs a top coat, so be it.
Right, and I think there was some bond that remains for finishing that work if it doesn't get done. If the developer who owns that, or whoever that landowner is of the actual subdivision roadway, if they disappeared, I think there's a bond for for finishing that work.
All right, well, is the applicant not the owner of this property now and the roadway?
We're under contract to purchase this property.
Oh,
And
all right, okay, all right.
condition of our closing, actually, just to give you guys a little more color.
No, we can condition its completion, but that may fall on your seller rather than you to do that. But
In
I
fact,
think,
there is a lien. There's a lien on these lots that can be relieved in lieu of bond. There's a lien, and we've arranged that when our site preparation takes place and we provide the utilities as is required, and we put the top coat on the road as is required, then the lien will be released.
all right, that's fine.
So I hate that, I want to ask the question again because I do not understand. Why is this not a subdivision?
Because it doesn't create new frontage. Subdivision control laws create frontage and conforming lots. You use, instead of an A&R where you're using existing frontage, you're not, you don't create frontage with an A&R plan. It's, the approval not required under subdivision control laws. In this case, the frontage was already created and it conforms to what's required by zoning.
Right. Yeah. It
Lot
was
area
a sub,
and all those things.
yeah, it was a subdivision, but the A&R essentially reversed it by making 8 lots into 1. But the roadway was built already under the subdivision and it just needs to be finished. But what they're doing now, I mean, it's unusual, but not unheard of what they did, but they combined the 8 lots that were at one point a subdivision.
3 lots.
However many there was, 8, 3,
Yeah,
whatever it was.
like just using Cook Estate as an example, Cook Estate is one big lot with multiple buildings on it. It was not a subdivision. And this is not a subdivision. There are multiple buildings on one big lot.
All right, but it was at one time a subdivision.
Yep.
All right, thank you. All right, are there any other comments from planning board members? Can I get a recommendation for what we would like to do going forward?
Could I make one? So, sorry.
Actually, I don't think you can. You can say something.
Yeah, I just would like to maybe get my hopes across. I'd like to request as soon, it feels like we're headed for probably a continuance based on certain, our obtaining certain pieces of information, the largest of which at this point is a parking solution. And I think that we have furthered our conversations with, in regards to where our solution will come from, to a point where I would hope that we'd be able to reconvene on this either offline, or that would be ideal, or in a more intermediate period than 30 days or longer, because whatever the next hearing date is, I'd like to respectfully request that we be continued to that date. And that's all.
Would do that as an accommodation as very best we could, for sure. Can I get?
Do we have free time on the 6th?
I'll speak to that. We have the continuance of 808 CJC Highway Site Plan Review, and then we have 2 new A&R applications. One I anticipate maybe a little lengthier of a discussion than the other. But I would say that we do have time to address this if the application material.
I mean, I don't want to speak for the whole board, but I mean, I would be at a point to start deliberating and writing conditions and shoot to whatever the next meeting is issuing a decision. Mark, to your point, whatever this parking solution is, I don't want to get your hopes up, at least with me, that if it deviates from the bylaw and it doesn't have a variance from the zoning board, it's not going to fly. It's just not going to fly with me just for the precedential value. I appreciate the problem you have here. And I think it's called, it's getting things churning in my head about the rewrite of the bylaw where this might be a subject for change that we haven't addressed yet. But I mean, I don't know what the rest of the board thinks, if we're ready to, mull over conditions.
What
Again,
was, excuse me,
follow-
Tom.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Tom. What was discussed was having the building inspector weigh in on the calculation of net square footage. So they can conform to the bylaw and do the math.
Okay. I mean, I think the
number.
math is there in one way or the other. If the math is there.
Yep.
I don't think John's opinion is going to change that because the key.
But the point is it conforms to the bylaw.
All right, well, that means
council says
that means 43 more spaces.
I don't know what the final number would be.
Well, somebody said that earlier, but
All right, can I take this conversation to mean that we're ready for a motion? Will somebody please?
Motion to continue
Can I have a second?
to 6th of October. At what
6:30.
time? At 6:30.
Second.
All right, Clark Brewer,
Clark Brewer, aye.
Tom Callahan.
can I suggest that the members of the board, we start compiling suggested conditions that we each have in the manner we've done in the past? And perhaps on the 6th, we may be in a position to start discussing those conditions. I would think we would be, but that's what I would suggest as a process, but I'm in favor of the motion to continue.
All right, so you're making that as a recommendation, or do you want to include it in your motion?
No, it's Clark's motion.
Clark's
No,
motion.
it's
You wanna-
a recommendation.
Do you want to amend the motion to include that?
I don't think that's
that's-
necessary.
I think that's an informal comment, so just
Yeah, I
continuing.
don't think it's necessary.
Just continuing is the substance of the motion.
So let me then continue with that as information. Let me continue the roll call, and I'm going to start over again. Clark Brewer,
Aye.
Tom Callahan,
Aye.
Paul Grady,
Aye.
Eric Potter,
Where's Eric?
Aye.
There he is.
Aye.
Eric, say aye. Aye, okay. Amy Glassmeyer, aye. Thank you very much. We will see you on October 6th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we move into an informal discussion of proposed special town meeting articles. How this is going to go is Lauren is going to provide us with a essentially an overview, not an extreme detail, but enough for all of us to know where we are, and that will be open for discussion.
Thank you. So I'm going to quickly review a summary of the 3 articles, and then I muted myself, and then I'll update you on a schedule for town meeting. So I received some of the draft warrant intent articles from Katie Dugan on behalf of the zoning bylaw working group. The first article that's going to be proposed is the elimination of Cohasset's version of the single lot exemption. Specifically, it's going to be deletion of section 8.3B and 8.3C of the zoning bylaw. And the background here is for over 50 years, Cohasset has allowed an almost unlimited number of dwellings to be built on undersized lots from our current zoning, held in common ownership via a so-called single lot exemption bylaw. And that's those specific sections. It has the land use effect of allowing additional development that Mass General Law 40A Section 6, which is the state statute of single lot exemption, would typically not allow. This type of bylaw had brief popularity in a handful of towns during the 1960s and 70s as means to stimulate large-scale housing developments. However, it now has land use issues in Cohasset that need to be addressed, as developers in Cohasset can bypass state and local subdivision control laws associated with our table of area dimensions on lots and associated access standards. To the zoning bylaw working group's knowledge, all other towns with similar provisions have allowed similar provisions to sunset about 30 to 40 years ago, leaving Cohasset virtually alone in the state in allowing such development of undersized lots in common ownership to proceed without additional oversight from planning board and building inspector. So as a result, the group recommends deletion of subsection 8.3B and 8.3C. And again, just my addition to this is not going to eliminate single lot exemption entirely because it is a state law, but it will take that extra piece that allows Cohassets to be more lenient and more broadly applicable. It will eliminate that, and we will just be in sync with the rest of the Commonwealth and what the state statute allows. The second article is our changes to the residential zoning definitions. And there's 10 definitional changes proposed that are designed to address pressing land use issues in Cohasset associated with definition of buildable lots and adequacy of the way intended to serve as access to new lots created under A&R processes. The article also makes changes related to residential access and existing definitions of common driveway and new definition of adequate access. The current zoning bylaws don't make clear important distinction between a parcel and a lot. There are also clarifications to define to the definitions of streets, ways, and common driveways. Finally, our zoning bylaws don't currently include important definitions related to what defines aspects of a buildable lot, included a qualified way or a non-qualified way, legal frontage, and adequate access. Based on research and discussion with the town's permitting boards, the zoning bylaw working group recommends the 10 proposed changes to these residential zoning definitions. And then finally, the third overview is the ledge protection, which, as we had phrased it at the last town meeting, this is sort of the phase 2 of the land alteration bylaw. And so what this objective would be is exposed ledge face. That's a unique and defining feature of Cohasset. Over the last decade, this topic has been discussed and its related concerns over land alteration and development. Removal of an exposed ledge is often necessary for construction of lawful buildings and structures, and associated blasting is further regulated not by zoning bylaws, but by state and fire department regulations. As it relates to earth removal, Mass General Law 20, Section 21 through 2117 allows town bylaws to regulate the removal of soil, loam, sand, or gravel from land not in public use. The proposed bylaw amendment requires exposed ledge face removed for structures to be subject to a special permit process through the planning board. So those are the 3 summary articles. Before we get into any sort of substantive discussion about this, I just wanted to update the board that I have had to tweak our proposed tentative schedule for the warrant process. In order to open public hearings, we do need to advertise twice in a newspaper of general circulation for 2 weeks in advance. As we weren't really ready, there's been a lot of quick moving pieces. So at this time, I'm recommending that we add a planning board meeting on October 13th to our schedule, and that would be a standalone meeting to address zoning bylaws. This would allow us to, essentially, we would advertise the public hearings on September 29th and 6th so that we could open on the 13th. It gives us the opportunity for one overflow day if we need to by continuing to our regularly scheduled October 20th meeting if necessary, which would still allow us to proceed to select board and advisory committee meetings before the closing of the warrant on November 2nd. Did someone say something?
Quick question, have these been drafted? Is there a draft of the bylaws that are proposed?
So the short answer is yes, it hasn't been circulated to this group
Okay.
yet. And the reason
Right.
being, and that's why we also didn't advertise yet, because we needed to make sure we had a final draft ready for those advertisements so that we could direct people to where they could be found and seen. But the zoning bylaw working group is meeting tomorrow to finalize their recommendations, and we'll turn that around and we'll have that for the board shortly thereafter.
Yep, that is true. And I'll just make a comment about that article too, with the expansion of a lot of definitions. It was originally 3 definitions and now it's more. But it also will give a bylaw basis for the changes in regulations that we had discussed a couple of weeks ago. So we will have a more solid bylaw basis for making some of the changes in the regulations that we had already discussed. Those are going to be put off for the time being.
Comments from?
I have just as a heads up, Tom, I was just, so I'm on board with generally speaking, the single lot exemption changes and the ledge changes. But the one question I have is with the frontage. Is it right now? Is that one's on still, correct?
Correct. And it's what's been added most recently is even a sub definition of that. What we're trying to do with all of this and with the changes to the common driveway regulation and that residential access bylaw that we were borrowing from Plymouth and we're going to turn into a regulation. All of this is just to make it a lot clearer for both us and the zoning board on what's adequate frontage, what's an adequate access, what's an adequate way or street. and to make it uniform, consistent, and be very clear that there's essentially 3 different ways one accesses a residential property in town. So the core of the frontage definition is really just to comply it, to make it comply with state laws definition. You know, one of the objectives is to try to take things we have cohasitized over the years and bring them back more into just following state law and state definitions.
I guess, and just to thank you for that, but I think the follow-up that I would have is with the single lot exemption going, you know, we want to slow well, I won't speak for everybody, but it'd be nice to slow development and keep it under control, but also we still want to allow for development. And I don't know if there's been analysis on how the combination of deleting that single lot exemption and doubling the frontage to 100 square feet.
We're not doubling the frontage at this time. We're just changing the definition.
So there's no change in the frontage?
No. That's why we're not dealing with height that we originally were going to deal with. So any of the changes to the table of area dimensions, which are under discussion and under study, is probably going to come forward to you in the quote unquote, the big rewrite. We're talking with Carolyn and the zoning working group about perhaps doing the big rewrite in pieces of housekeeping stuff here and substantive changes there. But right now, we're not proposing any dimensional changes anywhere, but those are coming down the road. And to answer your question in anticipation of that, yes, we are studying what would be, we are studying the impact of the changes. If we made changes to the frontage dimensions, what impacts those would be. And we have examples in town where we've done common driveways and A&Rs rather than actual subdivisions. And we can probably make comparisons. Would you get more lots in one or more lots in the other? And in the 60s, the town made the decision to go away from the subdivision process to the A&R common driveway scheme of things. And that's when we reduced our frontage to accommodate that. We're in the direction of going back to traditional suburban zoning of using the subdivision process and maybe bigger frontages, but none of that's been finalized yet, but it is being studied. We're doing a lot of analysis on that so that we have the backup for whatever we recommend.
All right. Thank you.
Other comments from the planning board members regarding?
What is the date for town meeting again? I'm sorry.
December 13th.
December 13th?
December 13th.
Got it.
I don't see any other comments. Lauren, do you want to say anything further?
No, I just a reminder again about our upcoming meeting dates. We have the 6th, the 20th in our usual schedule, and we're adding the 13th. So that's 3 Wednesdays in a row. It's going to be a busy October, but I think that this will help us get through all of our substance. I do have a question for the board if we're ready to move on from this that's relating to schedule.
I just have one question. Did you say 3 Wednesdays in a row?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have a number of items that are likely to go long, and so we've got to space them out.
And my concern in that we just simply didn't have enough time to advertise these hearings, as we would have had to, an advertisement would have been needed in the paper today to proceed with a public hearing on October 6th for these articles. So my concern with waiting until October 20th, given that I know we have other applications on our agenda and that I don't want to rush the process. And I think that it'd be best to sort of address this on the 13th. If we need more time on the 20th to finish a conversation about these public hearings, we can do that, but then we won't be cramming this into a meeting that's already going to have other items.
I think we'll be able to deal with these zoning articles in one night. You know, because you a couple of weeks ago, you had a sort of a taste of at least the direction we're going, but like I said, the text should be finalized as of tomorrow.
So any other questions on the schedule that I laid out?
So Lauren, you didn't really give us a full view of what we have coming up. Do you want to say any more?
Sure. So I can tell you on October 6th, I'll just run quickly down. On October 6th, as we discussed earlier, we have 2 new A&R applications. One is 70 Black Horse Lane that's returned, and one is, the name is escaping me because I just got it, but I want to say it's 42 Atlantic. There's no new buildable lots proposed there. This is just a transfer of land, if you will, but more to come on that. Then we have the 2 site plan reviews that we had from our agenda tonight that will continue. On October 13th, we'll address the public hearings for the zoning articles. On October 20th, we don't have any new applications currently scheduled. I will say that pending applications that I anticipate coming in are the return of the site plan review modification for 390 Chief Justice Cushing Highway, which is a site next to Stop and Shop. I heard from the applicant and their engineer today that they were inquiring on submittal requirements and deadlines. So they are ramping back up to come back to the planning board for that modification. We also have been in communication informally with Casa Malatesta about 55 South Main Street. We anticipate a filing for that in the near future. And the other thing that came through, one of the things I get a flag for building permit sign-offs. Now it's sort of our checks and balances system. And one of the items that came through was a home that will require large house review. So I issued from my comment and planning department, they were denied and noted that they'll need to apply for large home review. So I anticipate that that will be coming as well. Other than that, that's really the immediate applications I have coming up for you. And then at some point we had penciled into the calendar on the October 20th that we would take up the rules and regulations around common drives and access and things like that, but we're going to hold that off a bit until we finish. The nice part about that process is that it's not tied to a town meeting schedule. We can do that at any time during the year as long as we have a properly advertised public hearing, because they're just rules and regulations. So it's not a town meeting vote that's required for that action.
Yeah, and that's also gone under a recent proposal of combining the 2 into 1 regulation. So there's still a little work to be done to be presenting that. The 20th, depending on what we do on the 6th with Situate Hill, we might need time on the 20th to do our deliberations. And I don't know how we want to do that again. This, everybody submit comments to one central author. I'm not, other than the clearing and the traffic, I'm not super invested in this project. I don't know if anybody else wants to take the quarterbacking of writing the conditions and being the central author point, but I don't need to do it for this one.
I mean, I'm happy to be your central repository if you want to send me comments, and I can start to incorporate them into a framework for you.
That's fine. That's fine. I just need a break from writing one, just because my own law firm schedule in the next month is crazy. So
yeah, I can take this on.
All right, so if that's all, then it looks like we have those things. Oh, Lauren?
Sorry, one more question. Now that I've laid out the planning board schedule for you, as we've been working through adding in training for you all, we've been doing citizen planning training seminars, and we have been trying to do them roughly about every 2 months. We had been targeting October 12th for one. This was before I suggested adding October 13th to our schedule. So my question for you today is, would you like to have training on Tuesday, October 12th? And the topic that we have arranged for you would be amending rules and regulations. It is a timely topic, but I will also say, given that I've laid out it's a busy October, would you prefer to push that to another time?
I don't think it's a super necessary one, but I would put it off. It's a lot to deal with.
That sounds fine.
Everybody, what is people's pleasure? Paul Grady, what do you want to do?
Let it off.
Eric Potter?
I think I'd put it off. I mean, there's a lot going on in October.
It is a very busy October. Okay, all right, well, I'll reschedule then for another time. I thought that you were going to say that, but I thought I would ask for your opinion as well before I made an executive decision on that. So I will reschedule that training and we'll take that up another time.
Okay, so now we come down then to the administrative business. Do we have any member comments? Do we have any items not anticipated 48 hours in advance?
No.
I have none.
Anybody that says that? Do we have any member comments or committee liaison updates?
No?
Nope, not that you've already heard.
Just one, Lauren, I haven't heard from that Ross Benetti at all.
That is interesting, and I'm sorry to hear that, but I heard from him recently. I had to talk to him about something, and he indicated that he would be scheduling meetings soon for CPC, so I will circle back and make sure that you are in the loop on when those meetings are being scheduled.
Well, I was getting really excited about it, so just tell him to speed it up and we'll get the ball rolling.
I know you're really excited for more evening meetings, Paul, so I'll make sure you get the invite to those.
We got to keep you busy, so you stop with those weird Facebook posts. Some of them are a little risque.
What Facebook post? I never go on Facebook. Wow, I see.
Okay. Paul Cleary, did you have anything to report on affordable housing?
No, but I did want to ask a question about Pleasant Street. Did the board approve Pleasant Street, or is that meant to come back, or?
No, they have a decision.
Yep.
Oh, it was approved?
Yeah.
Oh, good for them. I must have missed that meeting.
I mean, you might anticipate that a new owner might come by and try to modify something, but they're taking that property subject to our permit.
It's up for sale.
Yeah.
Sale
Okay.
or someone buy it?
It's
What?
just still on the market as far as I can see, but I guess that doesn't really have much to do with us. In terms of affordable housing, yeah, Cassie's project's exciting. There's some exciting things coming up in terms of, potentially getting some more units. She actually proposed something yesterday that I thought was interesting about, in addition to maybe the affordable, maybe make one of the commercial units affordable. And if maybe that was within our discretion, I thought that was a really clever idea. Meaning maybe one residential and one commercial. I know that that's not what is it CHDC?
No, it's
DHCD.
Yeah. Sorry, I got my acronyms. I don't think that that's their focus, but that's potentially something that we could do within the town to approve.
I don't.
I'm not exactly sure what Tom just said, but anyway, I
Mumbling
feel
to
like there
myself.
are exciting things happening and more to come. They're trying to raise money on 808 Jerusalem and other things. So still nothing added to our housing stock, but more to come. Exciting times.
The 808 Jerusalem Road is being used by the neighbor next door for storage. Do we care about that?
I don't think it'll last 20 years, so I don't know.
John Howland might, but not us.
Yes, he might. Also, that site, the neighbor, there's it's a little bit of a confusing boundary line, but that 808 Jerusalem Road has an access easement onto the other property. So it may actually be on the neighbor's property. I'm not sure. I can't speak to it, but I know that there's an access easement shared between the two properties.
Can I, speaking of affordable units, can I ask Lauren to reach out to CHI and see where they are with their plans on that subject?
So I can ask for a more detailed update. I can also let you know that they've been communicating with me as they work through their application, their local initiative application with DHCD. So they are preparing to file that.
Okay, so they're planning to go ahead with what they proposed to us before.
Yes.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. That was still in the works. So, all right.
Do we have any news about grants?
We have minutes to approve. But no.
We do have minutes to approve before we depart. I don't have any news on grants. I'm anticipating that the community one stop for grant application will hear in October was the time frame that they told us. So fingers crossed. But I am also doing some contingency planning with our finance director and some other town staff if we don't get awarded those grants. So more to come soon.
All right. Then can we move on to meeting minutes that we would approve?
Yes. Let's see. Jen gave me the list of them. If I could.
Yeah.
I looked at the most recent ones that were sent, the ones that were the 14th of April.
Yeah, I'm going to make a single motion that we approve the minutes of April 14, June 9, and September 8.
I'll second that.
Roll call vote. Clark Brewer,
Clark Brewer, aye.
Tom Callahan,
Tom Kelly and I.
Paul Grady,
Paul Grady, aye.
Eric Potter,
Eric Potter, aye.
aye. With that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second?
Second,
All right. Clark Brewer,
aye.
Tom Callahan,
Aye.
Paul Grady,
Aye.
Eric Potter,
Aye.
Amy Glassmeyer. Thank you, and thank you, Carolyn, for being here all this time. And now you've seen us in living color.
Good night, folks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, Lauren.
All right.
Bye, Angela.